Today, we're going to, you guys are going to talk a little bit more than what you have been talking. I'm going to share my screen here with you. All right, so this week, actually, you'll have 2 weeks to do this because next Saturday there is no class. I'm out of town that week on a trip that we booked before we ever started the course. Going to go to Kentucky and visit the Ark. So anyways, so before we meet again, I want you this time to listen to one of my sermons. So I was telling our staff about that, and they were cracking up, thinking, "Okay, this will be interesting." So listen to one of mine. Write a one-page critique. If you go more than one page, that's okay too. I do appreciate the critiques that you've given on the messages that you've done so far. That's good. After this next round with mine, then I'll introduce you to this an evaluation form that we'll be using to evaluate your guys. So the way you'll find one of my messages is the church web address is movementchurch.online. So not .org or .com, but movementchurch.online. And you can look under the tab of broadcasts. I think I've had every Sunday since sometime in May, so you can find something in there. I'm doing a series right now called When Life Happens, and I'm trying to tackle different things that we face in life. Like the first week was called Closed Doors. When a door closes in life, what do we do? When life happens and we get anxious, when life happens and we get discouraged, when life happens and we get envious, when life happens tomorrow and we're afraid. So you can find those there, or you can go on to our YouTube channel and look up movementchurch.online. Now, there are multiple movement churches, but there's only one movementchurch.online. So you don't have to listen to the whole service unless you want to, because it'll be the whole service. You can fast forward through the music, and there's usually a announcement video, and then it's me. So you can pick up one of those, listen to that. Second thing you'll do is write a one-page story of telling of something that's recently happened in your life. We're going to do some of that here today, but you'll come up with a different story. It could be something serious, something funny. Doesn't have to be spiritual. It could be something that happened with your kids. It could be something that happened, in the backyard. It could be something that happened at work. And then keep reading the Communicating for a Change book. So another 3 chapters there. It is an interesting book. Like I said from the very beginning, it's a book that I think is 15 years old, something of that nature, close to it. But I think what the 2 authors do in the book is very good. And we're going to be talking about that more specifically here. Let's see, in a couple of weeks. So anyways, keep reading the book and go from there. Oops, sorry. Just as a little bit of review from last week, 3 elements to effective communication. You need to know your message. That seems like a no-brainer. You need to know your audience. Most communicators could probably do a better job of knowing their audience. And then the third, you need to know yourself. So part of what you were doing this last week was kind of reminding yourself on who you were. I didn't get into everybody's assignments that you might have submitted for this week, but one of those, in addition to listening to a sermon of someone other than yourself, or if you use your pastor in the first week, somebody different from that. In addition to that, you're writing a kind of a reflection bio paper on who you are, so we get to know you a little bit better. So it's important that you know who you are as well. The question was, what makes you you? And I think God's interested in making you as a messenger, not just helping you with messages. So the Holy Spirit is working in you. He's developing and forming you as a person, as a believer, and certainly as a communicator. We've looked at this definition of preaching each week so far, the communication of truth poured through personality. Again, as you're communicating, your personality comes through. Now, what I think I realize about people's personality, the first time you're ever invited to speak at, say, church, it's probably a little difficult for your personality to come through because you are so nervous about this being your first opportunity. And then in your mind, you've got so many different things you're thinking about. You know, I'm thinking about, oh my goodness, what are people going to say about me? Am I going to have a good understanding of the text? Am I going to be able to communicate that? And so there's so much going through. It's difficult for your personality to pour through. But over time, you'll begin to settle in. Your personality will pour through. And remember, it's your personality, not that of your favorite preacher. Then I said, simply be yourself. And that's a challenge for all of us. How do we become comfortable in our own skin? How can we be authentic? How can we be, us? That when people see you out of church, you're the same person in church. I used to have this friend. He might still be living, but his name was Stan. And Stan was he was a missionary at heart. He opened an orphanage in Kenya and had a lot of stuff going on in that part of Africa, an organization there. But he lived here in our local community, and I used to lead a pastor's prayer meeting every week, and Stan would come to those meetings, and he would talk just like I'm talking to you. And then when we would pray together, each individual there, we all spent time praying on our own, and then we come back together as a group, and each one of us would take a turn praying. And it was somewhat comical when Stan would start to pray, because he sounded like he was probably one of the writers of the King James Version, because even though Stan spoke normal English to all of us, when he started praying, he used these and thous, and I mean, it was somewhat comical. But I'm just like, Stan, that's not you. You're trying to be somebody you're not. But anyways, I just want to encourage you to be comfortable with who you are and let your personality come through. And I think that's what people in the congregation or the audience will appreciate when you're you. So simply be yourself. We talked about what separates ordinary preachers or communicators from extraordinary preachers or communicators, and it is this relentless drive to improve. Now, remember, in this course, any kind of feedback that you get from me or feedback you'll get from your classmates, none of us are trying to destroy you. We want to help one another improve. And if you maintain that relentless desire to improve throughout the course of your speaking career, you'll do very, very well. Each week, especially if you are up every week or every time that you do speak, you should be better than you were the last time you spoke. So just keep working on it. Now, that's not to say that you don't have an off week. We all have off weeks. We all have those talks, those sermons, those messages that if there was a trap door in the floor at the church, we'd like to open it and crawl through and escape out the back and never have to talk to anybody ever again. We all have those. So I don't want you to think you'll never have those. We all have those. But people, for the most part, are loving, and they're patient, and they're understanding. And I might have told you that I've been trying to utilize people. We serve communion once a month here, and so I have typically been the person that would somewhat introduce communion, kind of little devotional thought. But we've got some other people that I think are they're volunteers at the church and other ministries, and I felt like they could do pretty well, and so I started asking different people, hey, would you like to have a week? We're talking a 1 to 2 minute thing introducing communion. And a few people have jumped on that and said, yeah, I'd like to do that. But then they get so nervous. They get so nervous about what to do and what not to do. And, and then they're just like, after it's over, like, was that really bad? I'm like, no, I mean, that was good. What you did was good, and try to help them. I just want to see them have a desire to improve as well. And they'll do really good moving into the future. We talked about improving our preaching by preach often. So again, every opportunity you get at this point to preach or to teach, try to take advantage of it if you can. Whether it's at a Bible study, a small group, a church meeting, church service, if you get invited to speak at another location or whatever, take advantage of those opportunities, because the more you preach, the more you speak, the better you're going to get. And then invite critique. At least maybe if your pastor has asked you to speak, or a men's ministry leader has asked you to speak or whatever, get some critique from them afterwards. How did you do? Did it make sense? Again, listen to other sermons. The more you listen to, I think the more you'll pick up. There's all sorts of great preaching resources to read, and just love people and pray. What we do, we cannot do without prayer. And we need God's help. All of us do, no matter what. If you ever get to the point where you think, oh, I think I'm good on this now, I don't need the Lord, then yeah, that would not be a good thing. You certainly need God, and you need his help. Delivery does matter, and we talked about that last week. We talked about these different elements like nonverbal communication, how you stand. Don't be a slouch. Don't lay on the pulpit if there is one. Don't keep your hands in your pockets. The gestures you make, make sure they're appropriate. Do as good a job as you can with eye contact. Conscious of facial expressions. My family tells me all the time that I have this angry look on my face, and I'm like, well, I don't feel angry, but they just remind me, yeah, you're angry. Like yesterday evening when I left the office, there was a vehicle parked in our parking lot, and because we've had some problems in the past, I always drive up to those people, roll my window down, and try to figure out what they're doing there. So last night I drove up there, and before I drove up there, my wife said, don't give them that angry look. You're going to end up getting punched in the face or shot or something. And so I drove up there, I rolled the window down. It was an SUV with 2 or 3 high school or college age young ladies in there, and they acted like they didn't know they were on private property, but they left. And after I left, I thought, yeah, I probably still had that angry look on my face. So be conscious of facial expressions. Be conscious of dress. We deal with this sometimes. Maybe I think I said last week, if the church you're speaking in is pretty formal, and everybody's a suit, and all the guys are suit and tie people, then you probably should be a suit and tie person versus showing up in your shorts and Hawaiian shirt. If it's a casual church, then you're gonna dress appropriately. But I think there's a few cautions. Yeah, I'll say this because we're guys here, but I do think when you speak, the length of your shirt is important, because if you do one of these things, if you raise your hands or make gestures in the course of your message, and all of a sudden your shirt has pulled up and your hairy belly is showing to everybody, that's probably not a good thing. You know what I mean? So, with the women here, whether they're on the worship team or whatever, we're always trying to say, make sure that you're not, given a peep show, in essence. Be careful about what you're wearing. We don't want to see you with yeah. Anyways, I think you get the idea. We talked about your pace, the rate at which you talk. You could talk so fast that nobody can really understand what you're talking about, or you could talk so slow that it's hard to stay connected with you, because our brains do function way faster than people talk. Inflection that we use, the pitch that we're at, the tone we use. I think I might have said last week with regards to tone, there used to be a day and time when people thought, man, it wasn't a good sermon unless I felt like I got beat up. Unless the preacher sounded angry, it wasn't really good. But I think we're past that. Volume, how loud you are. And we talked about filler words, trying to eliminate words like, or hedging words. Well, I think, or maybe. Those all kind of communicate you're uncertain about what you're talking about, and the like and the ums, that you don't know what you're even talking about or thinking about, or which direction you're going to go. And then self-evaluation. Watch yourself preach, watch yourself teach. It's one thing to listen to yourself, it's another thing to watch yourself, and then work on correcting bad habits. And to do that, you're going to have to be receptive to feedback. So that's a little bit of a review from last week on the on delivery. But today I want to talk about good storytelling by a good storyteller. You might not think of preaching as being storytelling, but I think you'll see differently here before too long. So I want you to tell us a personal story, minute or two, something that's happened in your life. I'll start. I'll tell you something that happened at my house recently. To start with, we have a swimming pool in the backyard. We do not live out in the country by any stretch. We do live on the outskirts of this medium-sized community, but it's not like we live by a woods. We don't live by trees. We don't live, there's not a field in our backyard. But over the years, we've had all sorts of animals in our yard. We've had foxes, we've had skunks, we've had raccoons. Of course, we've had squirrels, we've had lots of gophers, we've had donkeys in our front yard, at least. And what I learned about raccoons is that raccoons like to take their food and then wash it in the water before they eat it. So a raccoon will come to our swimming pool and take its food and dip it in the pool water there and wash it, I guess, before eating it. But a gross thing that they do is they like to poop in the pool water. And so we have this fountain area that flows into our pool. And so this fountain is probably 12 inches deep. And on a somewhat regular basis, we're finding that a raccoon has pooped in that. Okay, now we've got to get it out, and now we've got to treat it and all of this. So some years ago, I bought a trap. And the first time I ever set this trap, and put some food in there and went to bed. And no sooner did I lay down, boom, I heard the door on the trap close. And I went outside with a flashlight, and it was like the neighbor's cat had gotten in there. So I let that cat out. Eventually, I ended up not catching a raccoon that time. I actually caught a fox, and I relocated it. So a couple of weeks ago, I reset the trap again. I was told that raccoons like the smell of peanut butter and such. So I put some peanut butter in this trap, set this trap, and nothing. But like a week or so ago on a Sunday evening, we were sitting in our family room. It had just gotten dark when we were sitting there watching TV, and my wife said, "There's a raccoon drinking out of our swimming pool." And so I got up and she goes, I read somewhere that if you can scare a raccoon really bad, it will remember that and not want to come back. And so, like, okay, so we ran out in the backyard. I don't know what the neighbors thought, but I had these shoes. I was clapping them together. We were both yelling, trying to get this thing to run off. And it moved probably about 15 feet from the pool, a little bit further in the backyard. And then it stood there staring at us. And my wife said, "Get the gun." Now, we don't own any gun other than a BB gun that was my son's when he was a little boy. So, and it's got a crack in it. So, anyways, she runs in the house and she gets this BB gun and she's like, "I'm a pretty good shot." So, the second shot, she hits this raccoon, but from the distance that she was and the fur on this raccoon, it didn't really even phase the raccoon. It just stood there looking at us. I was throwing dirt, clods, rocks, anything I could find at it. That thing was in a confrontational mode. He was just looking at us like, come on over here and let's see who's the toughest. Eventually he left, and I don't even know how that happened, but so that's kind of an interesting story. If you don't know it, raccoons will poop in your swimming pool. Okay, that's my story. You don't have to tell one that long unless you want to, but tell us a story, any story. Doesn't have to be biblical, just a personal story, something that has happened maybe to you recently. Anybody. Don't everybody jump at once now.
Guess I can go. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that was recently, but it was in 2007. My wife and I had the opportunity to go to Switzerland.
Hmm.
I was a sales rep for Verizon Wireless, and top 1% of all sales reps. They gave us an all expense paid trip to Switzerland. So we were in St. Moritz, Switzerland. We had an awesome opportunity for only $80. We actually had half a day's worth of ski lessons with a professional ski instructor. And my wife had never skied ever before. Like I had been skiing, up in Big Bear area, which Pastor Bill's familiar, and Brian familiar with Big Bear. But I wasn't like in any way, shape, or form a professional, or I was definitely amateur. But everything out there, like out here we have bunny slopes in America. Out there was penguin slopes, so everything was like penguin theme. It was weird, but as we were going, we were in the little bunny slope area, and the instructor's trying to teach my wife, the whole like French fries to go straight, go fast, and then pizza to slow down. French fries, pizza, and she just wasn't getting the concept. She kept falling on her butt, and definitely as the morning progressed, like her level of like frustration kept building and building and building, and after about 4 hours, we were at just a point where all she had to do was grab onto a rope, keep her skis straight, and it would take her back up to the hill, and then we are going to be done for the day, at least for that phase of it. And she just couldn't get it. She kept crossing her skis versus going straight, kept falling her butt, getting more and more frustrated. So then there's a group that came from down the hill, and the ski instructor was skiing backwards. We're like, what is going on here? And there was a whole bunch of people, a group of people in yellow jackets, and they had like the little slalom, like the little, poles, and the instructor's yelling at people like, left, right, and I think it was either French or Italian that they were speaking, because they speak. Every kid out there speaks like 7 languages. So anyway, so we're watching this, and the people in the yellow jackets are just perfectly going around these poles as they're being yelled at. And as they went by as a group, on the back of these yellow jackets, it said blind person. And my wife got so mad and said, "That's it." And she, like, lots of obscenities that aren't appropriate for a church setting. And yeah, she was done for the day. She has not skied in her life ever since then. Just
That's good. That's funny. That's funny. Yep. Yeah, as soon as you said yellow jackets, I figured that's what you were gonna say. All right. Who else? Any story?
Okay, so
Go ahead, Donovan.
okay, Brian, you can go in.
Yeah, no, you go, Donovan.
All right. All right. So my story is one Saturday morning, I went to the bathroom, and I noticed that the water pressure is very low. Now, in our area, it's very quiet, especially on a Saturday morning. I then went to the outside to see whether the stopcock has been turned. I turned and I realized, no, it's not the stopcock. And while I was outside in the front yard, I heard a noise of a car racing down the road. And I went to the gate and I see it's a pickup van, a pickup truck racing. And I saw two guys um, running away from trying to get away from this van. The van then stopped. And as he stopped, I went to my driveway to the gate entrance. And I just heard someone running past. And as this guy was running back, I then stuck out my foot and tripped him. He then went flying um, in the road. Then I heard another car, and that car stopped. Wheels are screaming and people shouting out of the car. And I heard the lady specifically call, "He has a gun! He has a gun!" And as it was trying to get up, I then kicked him down again because the response of hearing he has a gun, that triggered, and I reckon, oh, if he's gonna get up first and get to the gun, then it's over. So he had a bag on his back, and then as I kicked him again, the bag flew, and he tried to get up again, and I kicked him down again. Then I heard my daughter calling my wife, "Mommy, Daddy is kicking a guy here." So I had him with my knee on his chest down, and the bag was laying on the side on the pavement. I then kept him a few minutes, and then this lady and another guy came, and they took over. I took the bag, I threw it in my yard on the inside, so that no one gets to it, just for safety. So they then tackled him and hit him, smacked him and kicked him. And as that happened, another car stopped with some of the guys from the shopping mall's car guards. They then stopped and they then asked, "What is happening?" Then one of the ladies said, "No, they came out of their house, and as they came out of the gate, these two guys stopped and they gunpoint them, trying to rob them." And that is how they then get. That is how it got to that the van chasing them. Then immediately these guys, the car guys started to tackle him, and they then kicked and hit him, and he was crawling. And every time he tried to get up, they would walk away. But when they noticed he tried to get up, they turned back and they kicked him again. And eventually he couldn't walk anymore. So as this was happening, more and more people came. My wife then called the armed response and the neighborhood watch response. Suddenly, my house was surrounded and the road was blocked off. And the cops was called. The ladies then was asked, "Do you want to lay a case against these guys?" And one of the ladies then, now I noticed, wow, they took him, the police officers took him and put him in the van. There's one of these ladies, they went to go and chat to him and probably ask him why did he do it and all these questions. Then when it was asked by the police officer to the ladies that, "Do you want to lay a case?" This lady that went to talk to him to this guy. Then said no, she doesn't want to, because he told her that he knows where she lives. He's gonna come back for her. And so that was quite an eventful Saturday morning. That happened very early, probably about 8 o'clock. And as I said, it's quite eventful. So that is my story.
Did you say what was in the backpack?
Yes, the police they took the bag with the with the with the gun, with the firearm, and they then took statements from these all these ladies, and the gentleman that observed, that was witness to what happened at the home. Yes, so I didn't want to get involved in any other way. So I just kept quiet, because I know once you get involved with this, you need to go, need to go to court
Yeah,
every time
yeah.
as a witness.
Wow,
And I didn't want to get myself into that.
that's a pretty exciting morning. Wow, good job for you. That's awesome. All right, Brian, I guess you're gonna have to top that one.
Well, that's definitely a hard act to follow. But I think in honor of your trip that you're taking next weekend, I will talk about a recent trip that our family took. So every year we either do a vacation or a staycation. We live in the Phoenix area over here in Arizona, and this year we decided that we were going to go to Kentucky. And go to the Ark Encounter as well as the Creation Museum. So we were supposed to go 2 or 3 years ago, but money was tight and we got a better deal to go down to Galveston, Texas, and go to the NASA Space Center and do a few other things there. But this year we had the money, we could afford to make the trip, and it was actually twofold because we left and we got to Kentucky and we spent our 3 days visiting the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. Both are absolutely fantastic, and both are really they really do a great job of affirming the accounts that are in Genesis, which is, a lot of people struggle with the plausibility of some of those stories, such as Noah's Ark. Was there really a worldwide flood? And there's a lot of exhibits that explain in a logical and reasonable way of how it could have been done. That's not necessarily in the biblical account in Genesis. So I really hope you go, you spend as much time as you can. But it really is, both sites are very, very fantastic. But the second part of our vacation, we actually went down to Cumberland Lake, which is in southern Kentucky, just south of Lexington. And we actually got to stay a few days with my wife's aunt. And my wife's aunt and her husband, they are the property managers for the resort on Cumberland Lake. They manage about 190 properties, rental cabins. And we got to stay with them for a few days. And during that time, we have 16-year-old twins, and the twins really opened up. They drove golf carts for the first time around the resort property, which was absolutely fantastic. They also got to work in the kitchen a little bit. They made us dinner one night. They made fresh made hand rolled pizzas, and they turned out absolutely fantastic, which they had never done before. Usually we just buy the pre-made dough and then put the toppings on, throw it in the oven, call it good. But I don't know what it is about the water in Kentucky, but the pizza definitely tastes better over there than it does in Arizona. But so as a result of all of that and talking with my wife's aunt and everything and just really just getting that quality family time, our twins actually have an opportunity to do an internship next summer at the resort, and help my wife's aunt kind of manage the properties, run the kitchen, and then also they own a shop, a little gift shop there on the resort property. So they'll learn a lot about, you know, running a business, day to day inventory management, work in the kitchen, and providing customer service to all the guests at the resort. And they're really looking forward to that.
That's awesome. Are your twins boys, girls, or one of each?
I have all girls because I'm the youngest of 5 boys, so I blame my mother.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, Kentucky's beautiful. Um, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for the encouragement about the Ark and the Creation Museum. We're looking forward to that. Well, you can see that when you're telling a story that is something that you've experienced personally, none of you needed notes to do that. You were able to move us from the beginning to the end of that story. You were able to keep us engaged the entire time while telling us that story. You were able to describe some of the details of that story enough that we could picture in our own minds. Like we could all picture Donovan tripping a guy and then basically sitting on top of him, you know. So we could picture that. We can picture this resort in Kentucky. We can picture the frustration of Aaron's wife watching blind skiers when she was having difficulty. I mean, you know, we can all picture those things. So stories are a powerful, powerful tool. The question I want to ask you is, just as a person in general, are you a person who thinks in terms of principles, or do you think in terms of pictures? Now, I don't know if this is a male-female thing. I would say without a doubt, my wife would say she thinks in terms of pictures. I would say I probably think in terms of principles, but do you think in terms of principles or pictures?
I would say for me, I think more along the lines of principles. I'm very process oriented. That's how I learn better. You know, you tell a story beginning, middle, crescendo, end. And it's very much for me about that process, that order of operations. Helps me to get a better picture of the message that's trying to be conveyed.
Okay, good. Aaron,
For me, it's kind of a little bit of both, but pictures is more like a visual, just because I'm so much of a visual learner. So
okay,
I like to try to portray stuff that people can visually see and then relate the information with the principles. So
okay. Donovan, are you more of a principle thinker or a picture thinker?
I think more of a picture.
Picture, okay.
Picture.
It seems to be that people who think more in terms of pictures have an easier time telling stories than people who don't think in terms of those. But it's something that I think we can learn. It's something that I think if we work at, we can become better storytellers. Here's another question for you. And I don't know how this translates in South Africa, but what is your favorite TV show or movie and why? You got a favorite TV show? It might be an ongoing series. What's your favorite TV show or movie and why? Donovan?
For me, first of all, it and team, it would be more of comedy. I like to watch the shows like The Big Bang Theory. So those are more, I suppose, because at work we are very head down and focused, and when you get home, you would want to more or have a more relaxed atmosphere and just be a bit loose and just relax and get into a mode of where you can just have fun, and especially with the boys, they would like to watch it with me. So I think that is a favorite, my favorite TV show, and that's the reason why, probably.
Good, good, thank you. All right, Aaron or Brian?
And for me, favorite is Star Wars series. Just mainly, just it's such a huge universe, and just you have the story of good versus evil, which is pretty classic in American movies. But for me, especially the books, the extended universe, just I mean, it's overall just a good overall story arc. Depending on which path you go to, and there's different ways you can go with the stories, and a lot of variety as well. So.
Okay, Brian?
For me, there's one movie that every time I see it on the television, I will stop to watch it no matter what part it's at, and that would be The Princess Bride. Aaron posted in the chat, The Princess Bride, and I've always been a huge fan of like the slapstick comedies, the old Mel Brooks stuff, Monty Python. And The Princess Bride does a really good job of telling the story, from the grandfather's point of view, reading to Fred Savage. And then I've always been a fan of Carrie Elwes, who's the main character. And it has a really, really good mixture of action, adventure, comedy. Andre the Giant's in there, and I was a huge fan of him back in his prime days. And so yeah, it's just a really, really good story overall.
Good, good. I guess some movies that I've liked over the years. I've probably seen all of Sylvester Stallone in the Rambo movies. I've seen all the Rocky movies as well. I'm a fan. I like watching like Hallmark type movies. My family laughs at me because at Christmas time when they're running Christmas movies, so those are mostly love story type things. I like a show that's I've been watching past seasons, so I don't know if it's still airing. I think it might be, but it's called SWAT. So it's about Los Angeles SWAT team. The action packed shows like that. Let's see, there was a movie had a 2 parts to it. The second one just recently came out, but it was an action packed movie as well. I think what I like about, for me, for a show to be good or for a movie to be good, it has to hold my attention. Now, I refer to these types of films as kids' movies, although I don't think they're truly made for kids, but more Disney type movies that come to the theater. If I go see a film like that, I usually fall asleep. My family knows. Yeah, don't take Dad. He's just going to fall asleep. But yeah, so I guess I like the more action packed, and then there's that other weird side of me that likes those more love story type shows or movies, because partly I think about the flow that when you think about a 2-hour film, for example, that's going to keep your attention all the way from the beginning to the end, is really hard to do, to hold somebody's attention for 2 hours roughly. That, if it's a 30-minute sitcom show on TV and with commercials, it's probably about 20-something minutes. But to hold your attention, that's a hard thing to do. And so now when we stand up in church to speak, we're speaking to a group of people who demand to be entertained at least all week long. So, I've worked all day. I come home, I sit on the couch or I sit in my chair and I want to watch a show or I want to watch a movie. And I expect you to hold my attention and I expect you to make it enjoyable for me. Well, I think when people come to church, they're thinking the same thing as well. That, yeah, I expect you to hold my attention as well. The problem that we have as speakers is we don't have multiple $1 million budgets to build everything around a 25 or 30 or 40-minute message like the film industry or TV shows do. But yeah, I think we are a culture that that does think in terms of this kind of thing. I would assume that each of you has seen the movie The Passion of the Christ. I mean, that film came out some years ago now, but do you remember where you were and when you saw this film for the first time, and what did the movie do to you? If you didn't see the film, just say so. But if you saw it, where were you when you saw it, and what did it do to you?
So I don't remember exactly when it was that we saw it or even where, which theater. The one thing that I remember about the film is um, I really got emotional, to be honest with you. Seeing visually, what is portrayed in the text. It's one thing to read the text and picture it in your mind, but it's a completely different thing to visually see it with your eyes and all the sounds and everything of what it possibly could have been like. So I remember it was very emotional. I teared up. I got angry. I remember feeling that. The one thing about the movie that, from a storytelling perspective, is that it was all closed captioned because they did it in I can't Aramaic or Hebrew, and so that kind of took away from the story for me personally, just because I had trouble watching and reading at the same time. So
Yeah, I would agree with you about closed caption movies. That's difficult for me. My wife will sit down and watch a movie in another language and just read it, and I go, "No, you're not watching a movie; you're reading a movie." But anyway, yep, okay. Aaron or Donovan, what happened when you first saw the movie?
Yeah, my wife and I saw it in the movie theaters, and same thing, just the level of emotions that it brings out within you. And just to Brian's point, also like the anger and just the hurt and like feeling the path that Jesus took as well. Like it was greatly impactful. Just the way that it was done, just the photography, you know, just brought you to that moment and brought you into that world at that time. And just and I don't know if you saw my comment, the sequel is actually being developed too. So I
I
don't know
that too. Yeah.
don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see. I
Right.
think it's more the resurrection though, is what their next thought process is.
Donovan, did you see the film?
Yes, I did. Always brings up a lot of emotions. It was interesting for me that they, the language, as Brian has mentioned, that you sort of struggle all the time to just keep track of what the storyline. Interesting for me is that how they depict the scenes and the gruesome scenes, especially the ones of the where they depict the demon, and that part of within the story. So that is displayed as something different to what we normally used to see with all the other films of the crucifixion. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But always emotion.
I you know, prior to seeing the film, I'm sure we had all heard the crucifixion story probably hundreds of times. I mean, that certainly wasn't the first time that we heard the story. And we might have actually seen other Jesus movies, but there was something about Mel Gibson's storytelling that just caused those scenes to just come to life in a whole new way and capture us emotionally. You know, when grown men are crying and tearing up, somehow that the storytelling there was able to capture our attention, and not just our attention, but capture us emotionally. And that's what made that a powerful, powerful movie. I think along those lines, if if you can take a strong principle, or you could take a strong truth from the Word of God, and somehow you can convey that in a vivid picture, you have a greater chance of capturing those in your audience, those who are listening to you, and holding their attention and making that memorable. The film, I don't remember the year that film came out, but it's been a while. But we can all still remember some of those scenes as if we just saw them this morning. It's a pretty powerful thing. It's a good illustration of storytelling. And if you think about every time you get up to speak, if you start thinking in terms of storytelling, and by that, I don't just mean you're going to tell a story as an illustration, but you are going to think in terms of your entire message or your entire talk as like a story. You begin to develop this flow, and here and there throughout the course of the talk, you can bring things to vivid imagery for people. It's a powerful tool. I think this is why Jesus used stories. I go so far to say Jesus probably the greatest storyteller in history, at least the most influential storyteller in history. I mean, think about it. He told stories about farmers, told stories about fathers, told stories about fishermen. He often used parables. We talked about parables that related to treasures on this earth, and he just used stories to captivate his audience, with stories that were relevant to them, that they knew and would understand exactly what he was talking about. So he tells stories about shrewd money managers. He tells stories about persistent widows, or proud Pharisees, or hated tax collectors. And somehow he, through storytelling, makes heroes out of outcasts and stars out of sinners. He takes these people that in many cases were being written off, and he turns it around for them. I think storytelling and the effect of storytelling, the power of storytelling, is why Jesus chose to speak so often in terms of stories. You don't really think in terms of Jesus talking of, oh, he's going to lay out 3 points and then everybody's going to remember that. He kind of takes these complex truths, these large ideas, and then he communicates them using stories, and everybody walks away from hearing him knowing exactly what he's talking about and remember what he's talking about. In your own personal life, excuse me, who's the best storyteller that you either know personally or you've ever heard before? Who's the best storyteller you know?
I would say my pastor, he's a very good storyteller.
Okay.
Passed away.
All right.
always keep the audience through the stories that he tells from his experiences.
Okay.
Very interesting. So you can keep the audience captive with the story and the storylines that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good you said him, because my next question was going to be how good of a storyteller is your pastor? But if your pastor is not the greatest storyteller that you know, who might be, if you can think of somebody? Could be your grandpa, you know, could be your wife.
Say my father-in-law has a tendency to tell the same story over and over again.
Yeah, so does mine. That's funny.
Yeah, day to day, actually, he's on this call, Brian. He's actually really good at telling his stories and just engaging people and just keeping it funny and just, his live personality, just, bigger than life personality, I guess. I mean, he's the only one I have to turn down the volume when he speaks. So in this call, so.
Brian, you do not have to say Aaron as your answer, but
No, that's not the case.
No, Aaron, you are a good storyteller. For me, I work with a guy. His name is Jim, and he is 80 years old, and he's still traveling around and teaching throughout the state of Arizona for different emergency management classes. And this gentleman, he just has a way. So one of the courses that he teaches, and he's mentoring me to start teaching, is how to respond from a first responder perspective to any type of mass casualty or mass fatality incident. And he does a fantastic job of bringing some lightheartedness to a very dark subject that he teaches. In one class, we actually did the math, and out of his 9 lives, he's used 8 of them because of how many different large-scale disaster incidents he's been present for. He was in the large earthquake in the Bay Area about 15 years ago. He was in the gas pipeline rupture and explosion that took out 100 homes in the Bay Area. He was in a landslide that his house almost fell down in. He was in a plane that dropped 5,000 feet all of a sudden out of the air. So yeah, he's got a very, being 80 years old, he's a grandfather, a great grandfather. He's got this demeanor about him that's just a very gentle soul, and he does a really good job with some of those classes that him and I teach together.
that's amazing. It's fun being around good storytellers. It really is fun being around good storytellers. How do you guys rate Pastor Steve as a storyteller?
Pastor Steve is really good at telling his story and conveying the message. He does have a tendency of chasing the rabbit, so to speak, and going off on some sidebars. And then, one of his little quirks is he'll go off on a tangent for something on any given Sunday, and then he'll be like, "Okay, back to my notes."
Yeah, yeah.
I think one-on-one, he's a lot better storyteller versus in front of everybody. He does do like mini stories that kind of relate, his message to what's going on in his life, but he doesn't expand as much as I think he could to kind of do a little bit better relation.
I mean, all pastors tell stories.
Yeah.
Some better than others at telling stories, but again, I think we engage with stories all week, right? So every film or movie we see, every TV show is telling a story. If you're watching whatever sports network, you're hearing stories. This past week we've at least whoever follows the National Football League, the story of Aaron Rodgers. We've been hearing the story about his injury all week long. Many commercials are all about telling a story. interactions at the coffee machine at work. People are telling stories. You know, when you go back to work on Monday, people are going to be telling stories about what they did. I've got a friend on Facebook. Every Monday, he posts the same thing. He wants a picture roundup of what everybody did over the weekend. It's people's opportunity to tell their story about what they did. Catching up with your spouse or kids at home, you know, come home from work, maybe it's at the dinner table, maybe it's sitting on the couch. How was school today? And telling stories. Oh, you should have seen what happened. This kid did this, or boy, at work today, my boss did such and such, or just chatting with your neighbors. You know, people are telling stories so we engage with stories all week long, and that being the case, why wouldn't a communicator want to use stories when they're communicating? You know, churches in the past, I'm not saying in recent years, but churches used to, you know, the stories were going to be told at Sunday school or kids' church or whatever, you know, so, but we've got to be good storytellers. We have to become good storytellers. I'm going to give you another opportunity to tell a story. I want you to choose one of these 8 stories and try to tell us that story in a nutshell. I'm not asking you to preach a full-blown message. Just choose one of these stories and kind of give us the gist of the story, whether it's the story of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, Zacchaeus, parable of the talents, the lost sheep, crossing of the Red Sea, Elijah and the prophets of Baal, or Joseph and his brothers, you know, from back in Genesis. So if you have one that you really want to tell, jump on it first. Otherwise, somebody else might choose the one you wanted to choose, and then you'll have to readjust. So, Aaron.
All right. I'll go with the crossing of the Red Sea.
Okay.
Just because that, besides that and the Good Samaritan, that's the one I probably know the better. So yeah, Moses and all the Jews were trying to get out of Egypt, and they had the Red Sea that they had in front of them. They had the Egyptian army behind them. So obviously there's a lot of pressure there, and there's really, like, at that point it could be a moment of no hope, and you know, we're basically trapped and backed up against the wall. But obviously Moses, talking with God, believing in God, God provided a way. So in that moment, whether it was an earthquake or some other natural phenomenon that God was able to cause to be able to have the parting of the waters of the seafloor coming up with enough time for Moses and all the Jews to cross over to the other side, just in time to be able to then, as the Egyptian army was coming through, then have the waves come crashing back down and wash away the Egyptian army. So just with divine intervention, they were able to escape Egypt.
Awesome. Good job. Somebody else? Take a different one. I guess the assumption is that you would know these stories.
Donovan, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay.
So the story of the prodigal son. Of course,
Okay.
we know about the father who had 2 sons. The younger son decided he will go to his father and he wanted his inheritance. The father then gave his desire and gave him his inheritance. He then went to on his way, and then he then enjoyed his life, of course, spending what his father gave him, his inheritance, and to a point where he had nothing at a later stage to eventually to live off. He then had to eat with the pigs, and he then realized that my father is a wealthy man, and in his house he has servants that live a better life than what he's currently have now. He was currently having now. He then decided to get up, go to his father, he realized, then he go to his father, ask his father to forgive him and make him as one of his servants in his house. He then went on his way, and the father was watching all the time, looking for his son to return, waiting on his son to return. And as his son returned from a far distance, he saw his son, and he said, it is said that he ran to his son. That is so much excitement he had to see his son. Ran to his son. Son said, Father, forgive me. I've sinned against you. Make me as one of your servants. And the father said, no, because he's his son. The father then instructed the servants to prepare a fattened calf, put a ring on his finger and a rope on his body. Of course, in the meanwhile, the eldest son then said to his father, but Father, this is a son that took what he had, the inheritance he had. He's been all the time, he's been faithful, serving, yet his son gets a celebration of a fattened calf and a ring on his finger and being treated. And the father said, look, you have always been here, you've always been with me. What is here is yours. It's all yours. My son has been lost and is returned. And that is the story of the prodigal son and how he went his way and returned to his father.
Very good. Awesome. All right, Brian.
All right, I'm going to talk about the story of the Good Samaritan because I think that story does a great job of illustrating our culture here in the United States today. So one of the things that we need to understand about the Samaritan people and the Jewish people back in the day of Jesus is that there was a palpable hatred from the Jews to the Samaritans. The Samaritans still kind of considered themselves Jews, but they worshipped in a different way. They had a different holy site than Jerusalem, and it was to the point to where the Jewish people avoided the land which the Samaritans lived. They would go the long way around. They would avoid it, and so Jesus is talking to a group of people, and he's teaching them through parables. And a lawyer stands up and he challenges Jesus, and he says, what do I need to do, teacher, to inherit eternal life? And so Jesus told him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And the lawyer answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus was like, you got it. Do this, and you will inherit eternal life. And the lawyer, he I don't know why, but he takes it a step deeper, and he's like, well, who's my neighbor? And so Jesus uses a parable talking about a Samaritan. So the parable starts out where a man is traveling on a road, and he is attacked, beaten to within an inch of his life. And a holy man or a religious person walks by, sees the man beaten and bloodied on the side of the road, and continues on. And then a Samaritan comes by later and actually provides assistance, takes the man to the town and gets him lodging, and says, hey, whatever this person needs, I'll pay for it on my way back. Just get him well. And so Jesus ends the parable by asking the lawyer, which one was the neighbor in this story? And the lawyer recognized that the Samaritan, even though there's a deep-seated hatred, the Samaritan was the neighbor in this story who acted in kindness towards the injured person.
Yeah, good. Again, you see, the stories. You can tell them without Probably didn't even need to open up the Bible and look at it. You just let her rip from beginning to the end, and you kept our attention the whole time. Stories are a very, very powerful tool. And why are stories effective? Well, one, stories have a way of grabbing people's attention. Stories engage emotions. We've seen that. We've talked about that too, about the passion of the Christ. I mean, most of us would rather, instead of listening to somebody who's going to give you a list of facts, or instead of listening to somebody who's going to give you an informational lecture, we would probably prefer to listen to somebody who's got an engaging story to tell. Facts and lectures can't do that, but good stories can. They create, or they engage emotions. They make things easier to understand. They make things more memorable, and they have a plot, and that's the helpful thing. And I think Jesus is a master at building tension in a story to be able to tell that story. Like the story that Donovan told about the prodigal son. Jesus did a phenomenal job of creating tension there. There's tension between the son and his father. There's tension between the oldest brother and the father. There's tension between the two brothers, and Jesus ends up telling this story in such a way that I think pretty much anybody who was listening to him, was probably thinking, wow, what would I have done if that was my son? So, there's tension created in grabbing people's attention there. And that the way Jesus tells stories is that he helps us to connect with the characters in the story. So I'll just take the prodigal son story. I mean, you could literally preach an entire message just about the father. You could literally preach an entire message about the son who was a prodigal. You could preach an entirely different message about the older brother. He helped us to connect with each of those characters. And as we connect with them, we start wrestling with feelings that we have, and then as we start to feel this story, it's one of the reasons why we can probably all remember that story. I do think stories sometimes are great illustrations. I think we can use stories that way, through the course of a message. There's a story that you could tell that will help to make this point or illustrate this point. You can certainly take the narrative in the scripture and tell that story in such a way. Like tomorrow, I'm going to be using that crossing of the Red Sea story. And you could just say about a story, well, there's a group of people that were facing a big body of water, and the enemy was chasing them, and somehow the road opened and they got to the other side and the enemy was killed. Okay, is that true? Yeah. Can we tell it differently? Certainly we can. When you're there as the Israelites and you're looking at this body of water and the enemy's right behind you and you see no way out, what are you dealing with? You're afraid, you're dealing with fear, panic, and all of this. So you can begin to bring that out in such a way that people start to identify with those characters and thinking, yeah, there's been times in my life when I felt like there was no way out either. So, and then God comes through. So yeah, you can use a narrative story in the Bible as your story. You can use illustrations as stories. Some of those stories can be your own personal stories. I think people really like to hear personal stories. They like humorous stories for sure. They like stories where you're telling maybe a story of how you failed miserably, not that they're laughing at you, but they realize that you're a human being and that they're beginning to identify with you. You're trying to get those listeners to jump into the story. to jump into the story with you. And as you detail that story and flesh that out, that's the power that's there. Like, I don't know if you've thought about this, but First Corinthians is a book in the Bible that talks about love. Especially chapter 13, the famous chapter on love. But the prodigal son story is also a story about love. Now, which of those do you remember best? Do you remember the story of this father who had compassion and, who would look down the road every day for his son to come back? And then when he sees him, he runs out there to him and embraces him and kisses him? Or do you remember the First Corinthians 13 story that defines love using adjectives like love is patient, love is kind? I guarantee you that you can remember the prodigal son story better than you can remember the First Corinthians 13 story. So we've got this story. It's got a plot, and you're kind of creating tension. You're bringing something up. Like go back to the story of the children of Israel in the Red Sea. They wanted to be free from Pharaoh. They wanted to get out of Egypt. They want to go to this promised land, but then now they're facing this obstacle. What are they going to do? They start complaining they want to go back. They start looking at Moses like, what did you do? So you're creating this this issue, and then what you're going to ultimately do is you're going to try to resolve that issue in telling that story that will eventually bring the story home. Now, I do believe that preaching is storytelling. So I want you to begin to think of your talk, whether it's a 7 or 8 minute talk, whether it's a 15-minute talk, whether it's a 30-minute talk, that entire talk is kind of put in a story form. And by that, I'm talking about a plot and the movement of that story. I'll get to a little bit more of that. There's different stories in the Bible. You could think about the Balaam's donkey. That's a comedy story. The multitude of fish. When Jesus is on the beach and tells them to throw their nets out, and they're like, "Man, we've been fishing all night," and he goes, "No, do it anyway." And they do it, and they get so much fish it breaks their nets. Then we get the underdog story, the David and Goliath. Here's this little kid, young man, he comes out, he takes on Goliath. Then you get the quest, you got Nehemiah, he's going to rebuild the walls, or the children of Israel, and their journeys, or you get a return type story. Here's the prodigal son. Or you have a story of tragedy, like Lazarus dies. Or you've got the more rags to riches story, Joseph, who, is basically sold into slavery by his brothers, but then he becomes the number 2 man. Or a rebirth story. You got Saul, who was a persecutor of Christians and sought to exterminate the church, and he has this dramatic conversion experience, and Saul goes from being Saul to now Paul. There are a few things I would caution you about in telling stories. Be careful about telling stories about your wife, your spouse, or your kids, or anyone else really, for that matter, that you don't have their permission. You don't want to tell somebody's story that was just told to you in confidence. You certainly don't want to tell that story. You don't want to tell something embarrassing about your spouse unless they're okay with that. 2 guys I was listening to said, in your storytelling, don't spoil Christmas. And what he meant by that was, he told the story about his pastor had a whole room full of people just prior to Christmas. It was a family service. Kids were in there and everything. And then he said something to the fact that Santa does not exist. Santa's not real. Well, kids are disappointed. Parents are probably wanting to, string this guy up. So be careful about that. practice the story, practice the punchline of the story, or the climax of the story. As much as you can, try to tell the story from memory. And you guys all did a wonderful job of telling your own personal story from memory, telling a story, excuse me, from the Bible, about, a Bible story from memory. And then don't make all stories about yourself. If every story you tell is about you and how you're the hero, probably going to lose some effect. But I want you to think about this in terms of your entire message. The message, think of your message as a story. So a story has continuity. That's a big thing. Continuity. There's a lot of value that we must put on continuity. A sermon is not, I think the downfall of a lot of preachers is that in one sermon, they're actually preaching multiple sermons. And they're like these abstract ideas that aren't connected together. And so they find it difficult to transition from this point to this point to this point. You've got to look at your message to see, is there continuity? From the moment that I start to the moment that I finish, is there continuity through this? Second, stories create an experience. So am I going to take people on an experience? It is a long trip, someone has said, from the head to the heart. It's a long journey for us to get from here to here. And stories can help in that. Our job is not just to transfer information. We want to create an experience where people might gain that information, but we're ultimately seeking for life change. Take people on the experience. For example, there's a story in the Bible of the beggar sitting at the gate. And Peter and John come to the temple. I think this is in Acts 4 or 5, 3, 4 or 5, somewhere in there. So this man's at the gate called Beautiful. He's out there every week begging. I could just tell that there was a beggar at the gate and Peter and John came and what they said to him, or I could tell the story in such a way that you begin to see the rags on this man, you begin to smell the odor in this man, you begin to hear the coins dropping into the tin cup, you begin to see his hollowed out eyes, you can begin to see him almost, you can almost begin to feel this situation. And don't just try to rush through something. Take people on a trip. And then stories have movement. This is one of the big keys of the power of a story. How you move people through the story. How you move people, how you move the message as you're teaching or as you're preaching. Most of us have grown up taking classes at school and whatever about having these points. You got Roman numeral 1, as your first point, and then you might have some subpoints A and B, and then if you have a subpoint A, you've got to have a subpoint B, and then you've got Roman numeral 2, and so you might structure a message in this way, and but when you get up to deliver it, it becomes disjointed. There's no movement and there's no continuity through that. There's no flow. That's another word I want you to remember. You've got to think about how your message is moving and how you are flowing. Every good TV producer, every good movie producer, every good author of a book, there's a flow that's keeping you engaged from the moment you read the first page or watch the first opening line to the last closing line of the show or the movie. It is keeping you engaged. There might be different stories that serve as subplots along the way to keep you engaged, but overall, you are engaged because there is this flow. It's not like we sit down in our study and grab all these scraps of notes that we've taken and then somehow try to figure out how we can put this together and make a whole. We've got to think of it more in terms of like baking, you know, you've got this ingredient and then this ingredient, and you do this with this ingredient, you mix this, or you roll this, or you pat this, or you stretch this, and then you put this in a pan and you set it in the oven, you bake it, and then boom, out comes this, you know, pie, or out comes this loaf of bread. I think continuity, creating experience, and then moving people is what's going to help you as a communicator. So I don't know how well you can see this, but even if you can't read everything in here, I found this online about the anatomy of a great message. And they're talking in terms of the beginning of the message, the middle of the message, and the end of the message, and how you are trying to connect things together. You're creating a tension in there, but all three of those parts, the beginning, middle, and end, they're all connected together in a way that maintains continuity. And then you get to the middle, and this is where you kind of build out the meat of the message, and then you eventually get to the ending of the message, where now you're going to figure out how to land this thing. So as you are preparing your next talk, whenever that might be, I want you to think in terms of the flow, and how you are going to take people from the beginning to the end. Don't just think in terms of points, you know, because if you do think in terms of points, it's the transitions between those points that helps connect it all together. I think you're probably reading in the book that oftentimes there's more than one message in a message, you know. I think they've said something to the effect that you could have a message that's really a series, that you're trying to put too much into one message. You get the idea of a particular idea. You're going to hear this come up in the coming weeks, the big idea. You've got your big idea, the one main point you're trying to make in your message, and you're now crafting that in such a way that it's like a story that flows together and moves together. And at different points, you're creating some tension. If you notice, on any good TV show or any good movie, they don't create tension at the beginning and then resolve that tension within 5 minutes and hope to keep you engaged for the next hour and 55 minutes. They create tension, and then they maybe create a little more tension, and they keep drawing you in, and then they resolve that tension at the end. If you saw the most recent Tom Cruise movie, I won't ruin it for you if you haven't, but throughout that movie, they keep building tension. Even as they get more toward the end of the movie, they keep creating this tension, and then they kind of resolve that tension. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to practice telling some stories, you know, even if it's sitting down at dinner today or this week or whatever, this next week, and you're just kind of reviewing your day. Think in terms of how you're going to tell that story to your family. Or if you're standing by the water cooler on Monday at work and you're going to be sharing what happened over the weekend, think in terms of how you tell that story. Also, I want you to pay close attention as you watch TV shows or movies from this point going forward. Think in terms of how they have, how the flow of the show works, or how this movie moves, and how they take you from the beginning to the end, and pay attention to the continuity, and pay attention to the experience that they're taking you on. Is I think as we begin to notice, that's how the greatest communicators in the world are communicating to us. That's how you and I are going to become great communicators too. So I'm encouraged by you guys wanting to learn, and I feel like there's so much I would love to tell you all at one time, but it wouldn't benefit you, because I really feel like over these next few weeks there's going to be some stuff that is really going to be extremely helpful to you coming up, there's a couple weeks there that those were game changers for me, total game changers for me, from to becoming a better communicator. I'm not saying I'm great, but becoming a better communicator than I was when I first started. Now, I do want you to think one last thing before I let you go. I do want you to be thinking about this message that you're eventually going to be preaching for us. Be thinking of what that might be. If you've already preached it before or taught it before, try to do something different. So maybe there's a passage of scripture, or maybe there's a story that you get inspired to share in a message to us. But be thinking about that, because when we get down to the in-depth preparation for that week, I told you that there's probably going to be about 20 hours that you're going to put into this. I don't want you doing it all in 1 week. So at least begin to identify what you want to speak about. And then if you want to chat with me about that privately, we can email or call or chat or however you want to do that. I'm be more than willing to help you on that. The assignments that you do, I know Brian had some problems getting things put into uploaded into the portal, and I think Fully Equipped Bible Institute had some problems this past week with the site and all of that. I think some of that might have gotten resolved, but it works out best if you can submit your assignments onto the portal, and then I can access them that way versus just emailing them to me. But if you are having problems getting them onto the portal, let me know. You can just email me privately, let me know, and I'll either try to help you or I'll get somebody to help you so that you can do that. But it's easier if you do that, because any feedback I give you can go right back onto that, and then hopefully any feedback I give you, again, is not to discourage you, it's to help you to become better. So yeah, you could combine the two papers into one if you want. Okay, so it doesn't. Okay, I'll ask them about that. I see your question there. If you're not able to upload more than one, I'll find the answer out to that question today, and I'll email you guys back about that. But if that is true and you can't upload multiple papers, then yeah, you can make it one document instead of a 2-pager. It's a 4-pager. It's all in one there, if that's easiest. But I'll try to get back with you today. Donovan, I wanted to say to you that as I emailed you yesterday and then you emailed me back, I realized that when I emailed you yesterday at 5:30 my time, it was like 2:30 in the morning for you, and then you replied back to me right away, and I was like, oh my goodness, I hope I didn't wake you up in the middle of the night and then you thought you had to get back with me. So I apologize about that. So
No, not at all, Pastor. I was awake. I was up.
I realized, oh my goodness, 8 hours ahead of me. It's in the middle of the night. So yeah, if you do get something from me in the middle of the night, don't feel like you have to reply back right away. But so I'll again, if you've got issues or questions uploading to the portal, email me. If there's anything else I can help you with, feel free to reach out. Remember, next Saturday we will not be on, so it'll be 2 weeks from today. So that'll be the 30th, September 30th will be our next one. And I know one of you isn't going to be here that day. So anyways, yeah, any questions, anything I can help you with about beginning to think in terms of your sermon, feel free to reach out. But I'll pray for you guys. Lord, I thank you for these men. I just pray your blessing over them, Lord, as they be lovers of God and lovers of people and become great communicators, Lord. I pray that these men, that all 4 of us, Lord, would become better communicators, be more effective for you and building your church and expanding your kingdom. And communicating your word. I pray that you will bring anointing and guidance. I pray that you'll help us as we start thinking in terms of the sermon that's going to be delivered with this class. I just pray you'll begin to plant that idea, that text, that thought into the hearts and minds of these men, Lord, so they'll know exactly what they can do. And I pray that you'll guide them through the process. I pray you'll be with each of them, Lord, these next couple of weeks until we meet again. We give thanks to you today, Lord, for your goodness and your grace, and thank you for loving us. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Well, look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Pastor Bo.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Y'all take care.